Nobody expected Caitlin Clark to send a warning like this, especially not in a moment that looked so calm on the surface. Because if you just glanced at it quickly, it didn't look dramatic. There was no heated debate, no bold headline flashing across the screen, no viral clip of her shouting or calling someone out. It was quiet, almost too quiet. And that's exactly why it caught people off guard. Because the most dangerous statements in sports aren't always the loud ones. They're the ones delivered so casually, so naturally, that you almost miss what's really being said. But if you were actually paying attention, if you listened closely to the way she spoke, the confidence in her tone, and the way she didn't hesitate even once, you realized something immediately. This wasn't just another appearance. This wasn't just another interview. And it definitely wasn't just another athlete enjoying a little media spotlight. This felt different, because Caitlin Clark wasn't sitting there trying to prove herself anymore. She wasn't trying to convince anyone she belonged. She wasn't even trying to build hype. On that stage, she already owned it. And when someone reaches that point, when they stop asking for attention and start controlling the conversation, that's when everything changes. Because now it's not about potential. It's not about what might happen. It's about what they already believe is coming next. And that belief was written all over the way she spoke. No hesitation, no second-guessing, no softening her words to make them easier to accept. Just a steady, confident presence that made it clear. She knows exactly where this is going. And maybe even more importantly, she knows the rest of the league isn't ready for it. That's what made this moment so powerful. Because if this had happened a year ago, people might have brushed it off. They might have said she's just confident, just another young star with big expectations. But now, after everything that's happened, after the injury that kept her away longer than anyone expected, after the questions about how she'd come back, and after the pressure of carrying an entire wave of attention on her shoulders, she comes back and speaks like this. That's not just confidence anymore. That's someone who's already gone through the hardest part and came out stronger. And when that happens in sports, that's when things start to shift in a way you can't always measure right away. Because what people don't always realize is the most important battles don't happen on the court. They happen before the season even starts. They happen in moments like this. Moments where a player quietly resets the expectations, changes the energy, and lets everyone else know. The version of me you saw before, that's not the version you're about to deal with now. And that's exactly what this felt like. A shift, a signal, a warning that didn't need to be loud to be understood. But to really see why this moment mattered so much, you have to look deeper than just what she said. Because this wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. And it definitely wasn't just good timing. Everything leading up to this moment, every setback, every performance, every decision, it all built toward this. And once you start connecting those pieces, you realize something that makes this whole situation even more intense. Caitlin Clark isn't just stepping back into the league. She's stepping into a completely different role. And once that shift fully takes hold, there's no going back. Here's the part that most people didn't fully understand. The warning Caitlin Clark sent to the entire WNBA didn't come with drama. There was no confrontation, no bold statement meant to stir controversy, no attempt to create headlines. And yet, it might have been one of the most impactful moments we've seen from her so far because of how she said it. Think about it. In today's sports world, everything is loud. Players go viral for reactions. Clips get shared because of emotion. Moments blow up because of how intense they feel. But this was the opposite. This was controlled, measured, almost effortless. And somehow that made it hit even harder. Because when a player speaks without forcing anything, without trying to impress anyone, without needing validation, that's when you know they've reached a different level mentally. And that's exactly what this looked like. Caitlin Clark wasn't trying to convince anyone she's ready. She spoke like someone who already knows she is. And that difference, it's massive, because there's a clear line between confidence and certainty. Confidence says, I believe I can do this. Certainty says, this is going to happen. And what we saw from her wasn't belief. That was certainty. You could hear it in the way she talked about the future. Not like it was unpredictable. Not like it depended on how things play out, but like it was already starting to unfold. And when a player starts speaking like that, it creates a ripple effect. Because now it's not just about her anymore. Now every other team hears it. Every other player sees it. Every locker room starts thinking about it. Even if they don't admit it, because deep down they know what it means when someone carries themselves like that. It means they've already locked in mentally, emotionally, and competitively. And once that happens, it's hard to stop. But here's where it gets even more interesting. This wasn't happening in isolation. She wasn't just sitting in a random interview saying these things. She was on a national stage, surrounded by players who've experienced everything the game has to offer. People who understand pressure better than anyone. People who can instantly recognize when someone is real and when someone is just talking. And not once did she look uncomfortable. Not once did she shrink under that spotlight. Not once did she hesitate or second-guess herself. Instead, she blended right into that environment like she belonged there all along. And that alone sends a message. Because it tells everyone watching. She's not adjusting to the moment. The moment is adjusting to her. And that's a completely different level of presence. That's what separates players who are good from players who start to take over the narrative of an entire league. Because once you get comfortable in spaces like that, once you stop feeling like an outsider, once you start speaking like you're part of the bigger conversation, that's when your influence starts to grow beyond just performance. And that's exactly what's happening here. But maybe the most important part of all of this is the timing. Because this didn't happen when everything was going perfectly. This didn't happen during a dominant season where she had nothing to prove. This happened after adversity, after time away, after questions started building, after people quietly wondered if things might slow down for her. And instead of coming back cautiously, instead of easing into the spotlight again, she stepped right back in and sounded even more confident than before. And that's what changes everything. Because now it's not just about talent, anyone else. And right now that feeling is starting to shift. You can sense it. You can see it in the conversations. You can feel it in the way people react to her because, whether they admit it or not, everyone is starting to realize the same thing. This version of Caitlin Clark might not be the same one they were preparing for before. And if that's true, then the rest of the league isn't just dealing with a comeback. They're dealing with an evolution. And what comes next? That's where the real pressure begins. What happened next is something a lot of people saw, but very few actually understood. Because on the surface it looked simple. Caitlin Clark showing up on NBC's Basketball Night in America. Sitting at a desk, talking basketball, smiling, joking, and analyzing plays. It looked normal, almost casual, like just another athlete making a media appearance during the offseason. But if you really break it down, that moment was anything but normal. In fact, it might have been one of the clearest signs yet that something bigger is happening. Because you have to ask yourself one simple question. Why her? Why was Caitlin Clark sitting on a platform that has traditionally been reserved for NBA conversations, NBA legends, and NBA storylines? That's not accidental. That's not random. That's not just NBC trying something new. That's intentional. And when something like that happens in sports media, it usually means one thing. The person sitting there isn't just part of the conversation anymore. They're becoming the reason people tune in. And that's exactly what this felt like. Because this wasn't just about basketball analysis. This was about positioning. This was about visibility. This was about putting Caitlin Clark in a space where the lines between leagues, audiences, and expectations start to blur. And once that happens, there's no going back. Because now you're no longer just a star in your own league. You're becoming a presence across the entire sport. And that changes everything. She didn't just appear. She belonged. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. A lot of athletes can show up on a big stage. That's not the hard part. The hard part is what happens after you sit down. Do you blend in? Do you hesitate? Do you try too hard to impress? Or do you actually look like you belong there? Because those are two completely different things. And Caitlin Clark, she didn't look like a guest. She didn't look like someone just happy to be included. She didn't even look like someone trying to prove anything. She looked comfortable, like she'd been there before. Like this was just another environment she naturally fits into. And that kind of presence, you can't fake it. You either have it or you don't. Because when you're sitting next to players who have spent decades at the highest level, players who have seen every type of talent, every type of personality, every type of pressure, they can tell instantly if you're real. And not once did that room feel like she was out of place. Not once did the energy shift in a way that made it feel forced. Instead, she matched it. She flowed with it. She contributed to it. And most importantly, she elevated it. That's the part people overlook. Because it's not just about surviving in that environment. It's about adding something to it. And when you can do that, that's when people start seeing you differently. This was bigger than the WNBA. Now, zoom out for a second, because this moment wasn't just about one show. It wasn't just about one appearance. It was about what that appearance represents. For years, women's basketball has been fighting for more visibility, more respect, and more attention from mainstream audiences. And suddenly, here's Caitlin Clark sitting in the middle of a national NBA broadcast ecosystem. Not as a guest to promote something, not as a side segment, but as someone who can actually hold that space. That's a shift, a real one, because it signals something important. The audience is ready. And more importantly, the networks know it. They know people are watching. They know people are interested. And they know Caitlin Clark is one of the biggest reasons why. So when they put her in that position, they're not taking a risk. They're responding to demand. And that changes the entire conversation. Because now it's not about whether women's basketball deserves more attention. It's about how fast that attention is growing and who's leading it. And she didn't waste the moment. But here's the key part. Getting the opportunity is one thing. What you do with it, that's everything. Because there are plenty of athletes who get big moments and don't fully capitalize on them. They play it safe. They stay surface level. They avoid saying anything that might stand out. But Caitlin Clark, she didn't shrink into the moment. She leaned into it. Not by being loud. Not by forcing headlines, but by being completely, unapologetically herself. Talking the game, breaking things down, sharing opinions without hesitation, and showing that she's not just someone who plays basketball. She understands it on a deeper level. And that matters more than people realize. Because when you can do both, when you can dominate on the court and speak the game at a high level, that's when your influence expands. That's when people start listening differently. That's when your voice starts carrying more weight. And that's exactly what started happening here. The real power move was subtle. But here's the part that makes this even more powerful. Nothing about this moment felt forced. There was no big announcement saying, Caitlin Clark is taking over. There was no dramatic shift that everyone reacted to instantly. It was subtle, almost quiet, but that's what made it so effective. Because the most impactful changes in sports don't always happen in one big moment. They happen gradually. They build over time. They stack on top of each other until suddenly, you look up and realize everything feels different. And this was one of those stacking moments. One of those moments that might not seem huge right away, but later on people look back and say that's when things started to shift. Because now the perception is changing. Now the expectations are rising. Now the conversation is expanding beyond just one league. And Caitlin Clark is right in the center of it. And here's why this matters for what's coming next. Because when you combine this with everything else happening, her return from injury, her dominance in international play, her growing influence across the sport, you start to see a pattern. This isn't random success. This isn't luck. This is momentum. And momentum in sports is one of the hardest things to stop. Because once it builds, it starts carrying everything forward. Performance, confidence, attention, expectations. And right now, all of that is moving in the same direction toward her. Which means the rest of the league isn't just dealing with a player coming back. They're dealing with a player who's gaining power in multiple ways at the same time. On the court, off the court, in the media, in the narrative. And when all of those things start aligning, that's when a player stops being just a competitor and starts becoming something much bigger. And that's where the pressure starts to build. Because now every game she plays is going to feel different. Every matchup is going to carry more weight. Every team is going to be watching more closely. Not just because of what she does on the court, but because of what she represents. And that creates pressure. Real pressure. The kind that doesn't go away. The kind that builds over time. The kind that can either break players or elevate them to another level. And based on everything we've seen so far, Caitlin Clark isn't running from that pressure. She's stepping into it, which leads to the next part of the story. Because if this moment showed us anything, it's that she's not just back. She's ready for something bigger. And what happened after her return? That's where things start to get even more serious.